So it's currently a Wednesday evening. I've just finished work at my 9 to 5 and the sun is going down over London. There's a plane going overhead, probably heading to Heathrow, and I thought, what a good idea to talk a bit about death. So books have many purposes for me. They entertain, they inform, and they also act as a bit of a balm to a concern about the end of things. I think reading in general helps with my fear of death because it's just quite calming and it's quite streamlined. Like when you're reading a book, that's just the one thing that you're focused on. And I feel like in the age of the internet, many things are not streamlined. They're very hectic and random. And I find the internet really doesn't help me feel calm. It increases my fear of death and other things. And so yeah, books in general are a good way of calming yourself down. But there are a few specific books that I've read that really helped me just deal with my own mortality. And I'd also like to make the distinction between books that help with the fear of death and books about grief. There are many books about grief, but I find that those don't always help my fear of death because they're too explicit. You know, sometimes it's better to ignore something you're afraid of to help you be less afraid of it. Well, I think that's the case when it comes to death because there's no solution. Like some things you can be afraid of, but there's a way of like making yourself less afraid. Like spiders you could be afraid of, and it can help to remind yourself that a lot of spiders are harmless and you'll be fine. But with death, it's harder to like overcome that fear because it is inevitable. There's no cure. You can't stop death from happening, at least not yet. So these books maybe might seem quite random, but for me, these are ones that come to mind that have especially helped. So I'd like to start off with talking about the book, or rather play, that inspired the idea for this video, and I have it here and it's Waiting for Godot. So the other evening, it was a Sunday, and I was like, what should I do with this evening? Should I watch some Netflix or should I start a new book? And I saw this on my shelf and I thought, I've had this for ages, and I've started it and then stopped it, and I don't know, it's very short. It only took me a couple of hours to read. I hadn't completed it for some reason. Anyway, the other evening I just sat and I read it and I had such a great time, and I was writing lots of notes within it because this book, this play, it isn't explicit in its meaning. It has a lot of ideas and there are a lot of different ways you can interpret this story. And I think that is a key component in stories that can help you overcome your fear of death, because it like distracts you from the worry and makes you kind of contemplate other things, such as like, what did that story mean? So this story is about two guys. What are their names? One's called Vladimir, the other guy's called Estragon. They're Aragon. And they're chilling. They're waiting for Godot. Godot is taking his time. He's not showing up. And while they're waiting, these two other characters come along called Pozzo and Lucky, random names, and they're kind of weird, especially like Lucky. He's mute, but then he like at one point like starts babbling on and there are a lot of stuff that goes on that doesn't make sense, or that you as the audience you try to make sense of. And you know, I love it when a story doesn't like hit me over the head with its message. I love it when it's like, there might be no message here, or there might be. It's up to you. And I particularly like what it says on the back. This is a quote from Samuel Beckett, the writer. He said, "I told him that if by Godot I had meant God, I would have said God and not Godot. That seemed to disappoint him greatly." And I like that because one of the interpretations of this book is that Godot is God, and that you're waiting for God and he never shows up. But that's kind of too obvious in a way. And I don't know, it kind of helps my fear of death to be like, yeah, there is no meaning, but like, never mind. Like, it's better to take an absurdist point of view than a really serious point of view. And I think anything with dark humour in it can really help you feel better about dying, because it takes that absurdist view. Another play that I thought of is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh, this play is about a man who gets arrested. He's a writer, and he gets arrested because there are crimes that have occurred that are very similar to short stories that he's written, and it's set in a totalitarian state, and it's kind of a look at how imagination can be punished. Has a lot of other ideas running through it as well, but it's also very funny. And I think stories that have like horrible things happen but are also like quite funny feel very true to life, because in life bad things happen, funny things happen. It's never one note. It's always a mess of things. The next book I want to talk about is a book that tries to tackle fear of death head on. It's a non-fiction book, and it's called Staring at the Sun by Irvin D. Yalom. A friend at work lent this to me after we had a conversation about how we both struggle with our mortality, and I found it really interesting. I don't tend to read a lot of non-fiction, but I do think it had a lot of good ideas in it. And although, so I don't know, this is kind of what the book looks at as well. It's like, is there any point in staring at the sun? Like, maybe it's better to avert your eyes. Is it worthwhile to actually try and tackle a fear of death? Because, you know, death is inevitable, like I said earlier. There is a quote that got me thinking in the book that I'll read out. And it's, the more you fail to experience your life fully, the more you will fear death. Which is something that I agree with and also don't agree with. I do think that I was probably more afraid of death when I was in my early 20s, because I felt like I hadn't lived that much. And now that I'm 28 and have lived more, I suppose I do find it slightly easier to live with. But I also think that there will never be a point in my life that I won't like rage against the dying of the light. I think I will always be frustrated that life has to end, because there's so much stuff. Like, I just want to keep reading and going for walks and having a new day. Like, I don't want it to end. It's very annoying. The next book I want to talk about is within the epic fantasy genre. So I think reading stuff like epic fantasy is helpful because it's just so grand and there's so many characters, and the worlds are so imaginative that it calms me very much. And a series that I wanted to particularly mention is Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I'm currently reading Words of Radiance, which is the second book in the series, and these books are really long. They're over 1,000 pages each, and I think just the grandness of them really like fills your mind and distracts you from like worrying thoughts. And I wanted to particularly mention a character named Kaladin. So in the first book, Kaladin is a soldier, and then he loses everything and he becomes a slave, and he becomes a bridge runner where he has to run these bridges over these shattered plains for an army, and he just runs them back and forth, and it's really dangerous to do. And yeah, his life and the life of his bridge crew are expendable. That the soldiers and the armies don't care if they die, because they're slaves and they're just running the bridges. And he's really in a dark place. He just thinks he's lost everything, and then he tries to rise up from that position. And I think I find narrative arcs like that really helpful to deal with a fear of death, and also I guess a bit of a fear of life. The idea that even if you feel like really low and like you're never gonna feel good again, seeing characters that have been in similar positions but then they have risen from the ashes, so to say, is helpful to read about. Another book is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is a book I read probably about 10 years ago now. I read it when I was a teenager and it had a great effect on me. So in this book, death is personified. It befriends the main character, Lyra. No, that Lyra is the golden compass. Liesel? Her name is something like that. And yeah, similarly to how books personify grief or personify sadness, I think personifying anything you're afraid of that can't be really seen in a physical form can just help it feel more conquerable, if conquerable is a word. I also wanted to mention Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So this is also a book that contains some dark humour, although I would say it is more on the humour side rather than the dark side. In this book, the main character starts to hitchhike the galaxy, as the title suggests, and it's quite absurdist, and it makes life seem funny rather than terrifying. And I like the quote in it that says, in the beginning the universe was created. This had made many people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. Sometimes I do feel overwhelmed by how everything started and how everything developed and grew to here right now in this moment, and like how the chances of existing are just so slim. And then I just become very overwhelmed by the fact that I'm living. And I think The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy can really just make you like just sit in that absurdism and just be like, yeah, well, it's all weird, never mind. And I know I said at the beginning of this video that books on grief don't really help with my fear of death because they're just too explicit at it's better to just ignore it. I do think sometimes sitting with the fear and almost walking through what it's like to lose someone and what it's like to experience death can just make you understand it a bit more and feel a bit better about it. Maybe sometimes I read books about grief and I'm like, no, that's not helping. I'd rather read something happier. But I wanted to mention Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. This is a really short book, and I think it's one of the best books I've read that's looked at grief. It's about this man who loses his wife and he has these two young boys, and there is a crow that comes into their life after the man's wife dies, and the chapters from the perspective of crow are really unique. They're very poetic and kind of ugly and beautiful at the same time, and I think the writer did a really good job of making Crow have a personality and making him evil but also comforting in a way. And I think this book is very poetic. It sort of reads like a poem, and there is a line that's kind of a random line within the book, but I just really like it, and it's, they slept when rolling down the hill so that they were never still. I just really like that line. I can't really explain why. It's just quite playful and fun. Also, the title Grief is a Thing with Feathers is from Emily Dickinson's poem Hope is a Thing with Feathers. And I think there's a lot going on here about how grief and hope go alongside each other, life and death go alongside each other. And I think if you're looking for something a bit more poetic, then this could be a good choice. Okay, the sun has now pretty much gone down. There's just a bit of pink haze in the sky, and so I think there's probably time to stop this video now. Thank you very much for listening to my rambles. Have you got a book that helped you deal with your fear of death, or are you actually not afraid of death and you're like, yeah, that's just part of life? Because I think that's the mindset I would like to reach. And see you in another video soon. Bye bye.